do to me, and more also, if I don't make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow at this time. And when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servants there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die and said, "It's enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my father's." Now, I'm going to skip down to verse 11, because at this time, God sends an angel to help Elijah out. Verse 11 says this: Then the angel, basically the angel said, "Go out and stand on the mountains before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by. And a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, and here's the key, a still, small voice. A whisper. You guys can be seated. So let's break this down a little bit, and let's look at Elijah, and let's look at his example and see how we can recognize God's voice. And what we're going to do this over a period of weeks, and we're going to look at a lot of different ways that God speaks to us. So the first thing is this: recognize your need for a whisper. Recognize your need for a whisper. And the thing about it is, Elijah is in a lot of trouble. He recognizes that he needs to hear from God. Now, here's the thing. If you're here this morning and everything in your life, excuse me, take this up here. If you're here this morning and everything in your life is perfect, if everything's going exactly the way that you want it to go, if there are no problems at all, you're not going to need to hear from God too much, because you have this under control. However, if you come here this morning and you're broken, and you're needy, and there are things going on out of your control, there are things going on where you need help, guess what? You're going to be able to recognize that you need to hear from God. Because Jesus tells us, he tells us in the 5th chapter of Matthew, he tells us one thing: if you recognize your neediness, then you're blessed. I want you to hear this verse, Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst. Blessed are those who know that they need something more. Anybody here today? Anybody tracking with that statement? I need something more than what I have. I need, and you know what? Here's the thing. You're blessed because God put that desire inside of you to where you say, I need something more. What I have in life is I'm just going through the motions. Every day the same thing over and over again. I'm just going, and there's something inside of me that says, I need something more. If you've ever been or heard of the AA program, the first step is this: to admit that you're powerless over your drug of choice, over your addiction. You admit that you're powerless, that you're broken, that you're needy, that you need help, that there's something beyond life as you know it. You're in a real bad position. And what it really comes down to is those who thirst, those who are humble, those are the ones that are going to get help. See, Elijah here, he's in a real bad position. He is going to get killed. That puts you in a real bad position. So he does the most logical thing in the world. He takes off running. It's the first thing he does. He simply takes off running. He needed help because he knew, like he killed other people, that it was coming his way. So he takes off running. I know I told you guys this story before, but it's worth telling you again. It's been a couple years since I told it. I was at a conference, a pastor's conference, and we were in Florida. I was with my friend, and he's an older guy. And we were out walking. And in Florida, they have alligators, crocodiles, what have you, as we have squirrels. So we're near this little pond, and I heard something go bloop, like something went into the pond. And I thought immediately, that is an alligator/crocodile. That's one of those, I'm sure of it, I just knew it. And so what I did was I bent down and began to tie my shoes. While he walked, and I told him, I said, I think it's a crocodile. And so he walked out there and looked at it, and you could see it going across the pond. It was swimming across the pond, and he said to me, why are you tying your shoes? He says, you know you can't outrun a crocodile? I said, but all I have to do is outrun you. taking off running sometimes is the most logical thing to do. And that's what Elijah did here. He just took off running. But he recognized his need in life. Now, sometimes when you read the scriptures, you don't really understand. You think that these guys are super spiritual, but the Bible tells us something completely different, at least about Elijah. Look in the 5th chapter of James. It says, Elijah was a man with a nature just like ours. He was just like us. Elijah was just like us. So, I want you guys to say this with me. Okay? The first thing we do is what? Recognize my need for a whisper. One more time. I recognize my need for a whisper. The second thing, in order to hear the whisper, is this. Create an atmosphere for a whisper. Create an atmosphere for a whisper. 1 Kings 19:4 says this, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die and said, it is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my father's. So Elijah takes off running, and he runs until he's completely wiped out. It says for a full day. He runs until he's completely tired. Let me ask you this. Are you more likely to hear from God when you're on the run, when you're watching 24, when you're listening to the radio? Are you more likely to hear from God when you're sitting under a broom tree? You understand what I'm saying? There's actually ministries called broom tree ministries nowadays. I actually looked this up. I Googled it. And there are ministries, they're called this based on this scripture. And what they are, they're retreat centers where people can just go and be quiet. They can just go and they can hear from God. So here's another interesting point from this, a little bit off subject, but listen to what Elijah says. And this shows James 5:17 with a nature just like ours. Here's what he says. It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my father. So let me ask you this question. Anybody ever been there? Where you go, come on, God, I've had enough. I can't take this anymore. Just take my life. Just take me. Listen, if it's normal. It happens where you get so beat up, wiped out, so overwhelmed, you have these thoughts, and they scare you when you step back and think about it. But it's just something that happens. Elijah, same position. He sits under, here's the point. There's a point where you sit under a broom tree. You create the atmosphere to where you can hear from God or to where you're quiet, and you're honest with God. Because it's not like he says, oh, myself, I didn't know what they were thinking. He knows what we're thinking. He knows the struggles that we go through. Now, here's the thing. He goes there, he's quiet, and he's going back to our scripture. Psalm 46:10, let's say it again together. Be still and know that I am God. One more time. Be still and know that I am God. Now, I want you to memorize that, Psalm 46:10. Here's what I want. I have some triggers, stop signs right there. You see the stop signs? Every day we drive down the street and we'll see a stop sign, or we'll see a yield sign. These signs are something, when we stop, that I want them to be a trigger for us to go back to Psalm 46:10. When you see those, you say, be still and know